That would be great. And I saw Johnny and Lucy the other day. I'm like, we had dinner with them last night at Haruki.
You guys.
They said, they're like next door. They were like, you are proof that we are friends. They're not all 70. My dog is upset. They're fantastic.
It looks like we have, do you want me to remove him from the panelist?
That was great. He wasn't feeling well, so we wanted to be on line. Yeah, so we could be a panelist, that'd be great.
Yes, I'm not involved into the panelist, not ready to speak.
Awesome.
So you should be getting it on the page.
Great. And I can text him. And then whenever we're ready, if we could, what do we do?
He's on.
Oh, he's up, okay, great.
Yeah.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
Oh, we made you a panelist, you participate.
I saw that. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's, whenever you're ready, I'm such a jump in the gun kind of gal. Okay. I just came from the gym. So what am I smelling? Can you please call the meeting of the Special Committee on Environment and Resiliency to order, or to whatever, can we please take the roll?
Yes, Chairperson Underwood,
I am here.
Vice Chairperson Sanchez,
President.
Councilwoman Anthony, absent, Councilman Espinal is absent, Councilor Royas,
President.
3 present, 2 absent, you have a quorum.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm really excited. I know when we were kicking this off, and I'm glad it's being recorded. A lot of folks asked, at least me, about FEMA and how FEMA works and what we do for disaster preparedness. And Director Sturbo is amazing, and so we're so excited. I was so excited that she was available to come speak with us. I'm going to share this recording with 1 million people, but thank you so much for being here. Also for Ward 3 residents, so extra love. Director Sturbo had a presentation, but then there's lots of time for us to ask questions. And then if we do get any members of the public, we have time for public comments. People said they're going to come, but they're not here. So we will have some nice Q&A and then share out the recording afterwards. So we can make sure it's transparent. But Director, do you want to give the presentation and then we can do some Q&A after?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm always happy to have an opportunity to share a little bit more about what we do at FEMA, some of the areas that we're engaged on, particularly pertinent to climate change mitigation and resiliency topics. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity and thank you for the invitation. So if we want to do the next slide. So I put together a quick presentation. There will be, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to stop anytime. Just very quickly, I wanted to throw our mission up. So we have a very broad mission. Essentially, we are the all hazards emergency management agency for the city. Our jurisdiction is solely the city. So we work a lot with regional and state partners, including across NGOs, nonprofit, faith-based, state other state agencies, so Department of Health, DEM. So we work a lot with a lot of different agencies, but our jurisdiction is just solely the city. And then we work on all hazards. So that's natural hazards, human caused hazards, technological hazards. Essentially, the way I usually encapsulate is we try to prepare for everyone's worst day in the city. Whatever that means, we try to prepare for that day. And then our job is to, after the boom, we call it after the incident, our job is to resume a semblance of normal operations as soon as possible. So things may not be totally normal, especially after a major incident. It can take a really long time to go through a full recovery process, but the semblance of normal is restored. Your kids can go to school, you can buy food in the grocery store, ideally you have power. So the whole pieces of your life may not be restored for a very long time, but the semblance of normality is restored. So that's kind of in our mission statement of the mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, which are the FEMA core tenets of emergency management. Next slide, please. To accomplish that, we have a lot of different partners that we work with across the city and across the state. This is some of them. We have a lot more that we work with, obviously, that just wouldn't fit on the slide. And we work with them in a variety of different ways. So we work with I'm actually the president of the Rhode Island Association of Emergency Managers as well. So that's the statewide association for emergency managers. And that includes municipal EMs, healthcare, higher eds, nonprofits, and private sector. So through that, we have the ability to liaise, coordinate, and work with a lot of different folks across the state, which is a huge benefit to us here in the city during a time of disaster, because we have a great network that we can call on for support. And likewise, when they need assistance and support, we go out and help them as well. Obviously, Department of Health is a major one. We worked a ton with them during the pandemic, but we've actually worked with them for many years. We have roles and responsibilities through the medical emergency distribution system, point of dispensing. That's the vaccination, and that was actually a plan that was established in the aftermath of 9/11. So that's a long-standing procedure and plan. Things of course changed during COVID, but that has a lot of history there as well. So we've worked with them for a long time before the pandemic. Here in the city, we have our public safety partners. So police, fire, telecommunications, we are one of the departments within public safety. So there's 4 public safety divisions: FEMA, telecoms, so dispatch, police, and fire. And we work with them on a huge range of things, everything from public outreach and engagement to the big operations and preparations for events like Pride that we did this last weekend. So I can talk about that in more detail if you have any questions. The amateur radio team is RACES. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with ham radio systems. They are the kind of last call emergency communication system. They are the last ones to go down during any disaster. We have a ham radio set up at FEMA that is run and managed by our amateur radio club, because you need a lot of really specialized licenses to be a technician for ham. I'm not a licensed radio operator, so we have volunteers who are very interested in ham radio that run that for us. If you're interested in more of that, their annual field day is actually this coming weekend. They'll be setting up and running operations at FEMA for 24 hours. I can go into a little bit more detail. They love showing people what they do. So if you're interested, it's noon on Saturday to noon on Sunday. And they do some really impressive work. So if you have any questions, I can talk a lot more about ham radio operations.
And anyone can just pop in and out for that day?
Yeah,
Oh,
so they're open to visitors.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Red Cross, we work with them in a variety of different things. The primary thing we work with Red Cross in is shelter operations. So PCTA, Providence Technical Academy, is the largest shelter in northern Rhode Island. And it's a city shelter, but it could also be activated as a regional shelter for northern Rhode Island. And we work with Red Cross in the event that we have an activation there. DEM, I'll talk a little bit more about, but DEM is very involved in hazardous materials response and mitigation planning. So we work with them around a lot of the port activities, as well as some of our dams in the city. The dams emergency action plans goes through DEM. State police and the state emergency management agency, we obviously work with them. And Army Corps of Engineers, we work with them around the hurricane barrier. So Fox Point Hurricane Barrier is jointly owned and operated and controlled by, a portion of it is Army Corps, a portion of it is the city. If you have questions about the hurricane barrier, I can tell you more than you ever care to know about it. And then Crossroads and Community Libraries of Providence, as well as the Providence Public Library, we work with as warming and cooling centers during extreme heat and extreme cold events. And we also work with them around community outreach and engagement. So there's a whole lot more, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. Next slide. So Councilman Sanchez was over at our facility last night, but we are really fortunate that we have an incredible facility here in the city up on Charles Street. We have the Emergency Operations Center upstairs that you got to see. We actually have our emergency response team drill and exercise in our EOC that's coming up next Monday and next Tuesday. We're always welcome to stop by if you want to see what kind of how we would activate and how we would operate during a hurricane. Then we have a training room downstairs. So the training room is also available for trainings, meetings, especially if they have something to do with city operations or public safety and emergency management. And we're always happy to have people stop by and see what we do. and give a tour of the facility. We are very fortunate. A lot of emergency management agencies do not have nearly the facilities and the resources that we have at our disposal. So we're very fortunate here in the city. Next slide. So getting a little bit more into the hazard mitigation and resilience topics that you asked me to speak to, I wanted to start off with a few definitions. So mitigation gets thrown out there a lot in climate change. When emergency management, when I talk about mitigation, it's really about hazard mitigation. Climate change is certainly categorized within that, but mitigation is about reducing or eliminating the long-term risks from an impact. So mitigation in larger climate change sense is usually used around like emissions mitigation or sustainable electricity, renewable energy. That's not what we mean by mitigation. We are really talking more about kind of climate change adaptation, where we're talking about mitigating flood risk, mitigating extreme heat. And that goes through the hazard mitigation planning process. And then we have the hazard mitigation plan that's updated every 5 years to maintain currency with FEMA requirements. If you want to be fantastically bored, we have a over 300-page plan. We are going into our next update. That was approved in 2019. And I was the lead for that planning process. We are updating it 2023 to 2024. It has to be approved by FEMA next August, I think it is, July or August. So we're going to be doing that planning process again this year. That's a 5-year increment. One of the things that I'm hoping to do in this next increment is shorten it a little bit. I think the current plan is a lot too cumbersome for it to actually be useful. So we're hoping to tighten that down a little bit this next round. And we also we apply every year for hazard mitigation funding. There's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP is one of the options. The other is BRIC, which is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program through FEMA. I'm sure you heard me speak to it during my council brief for finance, but we put $50,000 in our budget for this year because one of the biggest challenges with being competitive for hazard mitigation grant funding and BRIC is having dedicated match in local budgets. So depending on the type of grant, it can be either a 1090, where we would only have to come up with 10% or 2575. The issue is often that we don't have that match in our budget, so we don't really become competitive on the national level. And if you want to go down the rabbit hole on hazard mitigation funding, I can also bore you with that as well. But I'm hoping that having the 50,000 in our budget might make us more competitive for some projects in this next fiscal year. Next slide, please. And then the definition for resilience, this is the FEMA definition for resilience. So I just wanted to throw that out there because there's literally 1,000 different definitions for resilience. We work off of the FEMA definition. So it's really about building the capacity and capabilities of individuals, communities, businesses, institutions, and government. And we do truly look at that at everything from the individual and family level up to the city as a whole, including city government. And it's the ability to prepare, withstand, and rapidly recover from any disruption. So climate change resilience is certainly a major piece of that, but so is cyber resilience. So is active threat training. So there's a lot of different things that come within the resilience bracket. Climate change is certainly a major component of that as well. Next slide, please. So here's a few of our mitigation and resilience activities that we have mapped out that are either ongoing or coming up in the next year. I mentioned previously the 2023-2024 hazard mitigation plan update. We're currently doing the scope of work for that and should try to get that awarded within the next couple of months. We do have hazard mitigation grant funding for consultants to conduct that planning process. But there's a whole committee that's involved in that as well. And we do a lot of community engagement on that. It's actually a required piece of it. So we try to get as many community engagement events as possible. City Council is a great partner in that because we try to do some of the meetings in the different wards and make sure that you are really representatives of the community, and we try and get a lot of input that way. So the other one is we are building off of a prior survey that we did last fall and working to develop bilingual public information messaging and campaigns about hazards and risks, including evacuation and shelter in place materials for the port and the neighborhoods surrounding the port. So We're going to be working on that this coming summer as well. We are always engaged in extreme heat preparedness and outreach events. We coordinate with sustainability on some of our extreme heat preparedness and work around that. And we are always working to collaborate further and push further on that. We're currently working with the State Department of Health's Climate Change Office. They actually have some folks that are looking at heat impacts on morbidity and mortality. And then I'm working with a research group that are emergency medicine physicians out of Brown Med and Rhode Island Hospital who are looking at emergency room visitations and morbidity and mortality on extreme heat. So we try to work with as many different folks as possible. I presented to the South Providence Has about extreme heat. So we always try to get the word out about that. If you want to know a little bit more about kind of our protocols for activations for extreme heat, I'm happy to go into that further. If you want an absolutely horrifying documentary that really goes into how important extreme heat preparedness is, it's called Cooked, Death by Zip Code. It's a documentary about the 1990, it was either 2 or 3 Chicago heat wave. And it's a individual who did a documentary. It's not perfect, but she really goes into a lot of the details about how easy it is to have a catastrophic extreme heat event and some of the things that you can really do to work to mitigate that.
Yeah.
So don't do it right, don't watch it right before you go to sleep, but it is a really good hour-long, 45 minutes to an hour about extreme heat risk. And then our hazard mitigation grant program, talked about that a little bit already. That becomes available annually. There's different amounts available every year. The same with BRIC. And we try to put together projects and applications based on what we have available and what projects are kind of top of the list at the time.
Is that one also through FEMA? Like, for-
Yeah, so hazard mitigation grant and BRIC are both through FEMA. Yeah. Next slide, please. So talking a little bit more specifically about the Port of Providence area. So I sit on the board of the local emergency planning committee too. The whole state is divided up into different LEPCs, they're called. The city of Providence is LEPC 2. I am the secretary. Chief Stephen Poole in the fire department sits as the vice chair. And Dave Alcoin with Narragansett Bay Commission is currently the current chair. I've been on the board for 4 years now. So we meet quarterly and it's composed of a lot of different stakeholders and agencies from the state level down to the industry, facility owners, higher ed, hospitals, and we convene quarterly. We just had our last quarterly meeting on Tuesday. And it's a public meeting. We post minutes, we post agendas. They're always open to the public. We would welcome input. We don't usually get any attendance from the public. So those are always posted publicly and the secretary. So if you ever want the agendas, I can get those
Oh,
to you.
yeah. Are they on the Secretary of State's website or are they
Yeah.
also on the Providence?
No, they're on Secretary of State, because it's a state thing.
Yeah.
If LEPC 2 is just the city of Providence, but it is a state designation. Yeah. One of PEMA's primary kind of baseline preparedness activities in the port is we conduct annual port evacuation drill. That's every fall with different partners in the area. And we conduct a spring or hurricane season port siren test. That's on Thursday. Hopefully you got the email today from Mike. So we do that. That's just a siren test, just to make sure all of our systems are functioning for hurricane season. In the fall, we do a little bit more nuance. We do the port siren test in conjunction with a code red notice that goes to people and industries who are on the evacuation list. It is not a public code red message, which is an important distinction. And then we have representatives from the facility simulate an evacuation. They come to an evac point, check in, and we do that every fall. We're probably going to do that the last week in September this year. So happy to share more information about that as well. We don't do a public message with that. We did once upon a time. It was very, very unpopular.
Like in what way?
People don't like it when you blow up their phones. So the public code red will blow up your phone. And people get very upset about that, even if it is a test situation. So we don't do that anymore.
Okay.
But we do a lot of public notification that we're going to have the exercise. Sometimes we have different stakeholders play different roles with that as well. And then in terms of prevention and enforcement, so FEMA has no authority or ability to do anything in terms of prevention and enforcement for any hazardous material things in the port. That's really a state or a federal jurisdiction level. So the US EPA has what's called EPRA, which is the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. And that, a piece of that requires tier 2 reporting. So what tier 2 reporting is that if a facility has more than a certain designated amount of particular hazardous materials, they have to submit a tier 2 report that goes to us here in the city, it goes to the fire department, it goes to FEMA, and it goes to DEM. And as the Community Right to Know Act, you can access tier 2 reports. So that's all housed at DEM, and they really are the ones that require that. We have no enforcement mechanism whatsoever in terms of if we have a facility who doesn't do a tier 2. It literally is like the EPA has to come down and audit them, if they are not doing it.
Can you like flag it for EPA or are you kind of? like
If we even
against
know about it. Because we don't even necessarily, tier 2 is how we find out what facilities have hazardous materials. So the facility doesn't have hazardous materials and they're not abiding by tier 2 and EPA rules. We often have no way of knowing if they even have it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Concerning.
Yeah.
Yes, there's also one EPA investigator for this region.
For the whole region?
The last time I checked, yeah, it's understaffed.
What's that like? What?
I think it's Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. I'd have to double check. But they're very understaffed.
One is like Southern Maine.
Yeah. I mean, if you're found in violation, it's a serious fine. Sometimes they're about $250,000. But for a lot of these companies, they're huge. They're multinational corporations. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, is your question?
I'm sorry, the Rhode Island DEM is responsible for getting the information from the EPA in terms of tier 2 reporting, like, can you explain that again, like?
yeah, so facilities submit tier 2 reports to DEM, us, and the fire department.
Got it.
And if they don't, that's EPRA, so that's a law they have to abide by. And there's also all the other different EPA rules and regulations as well. If they don't abide by that, essentially EPA has to audit them, find them in violation, and then go through that process.
So there's a big disaster
Mhm.
that a corporation, big business engages in. And they're not forthcoming until lives have been destroyed. And they violated this law. The only way we would find that out is like when the EPA audits them. It just seems very reactionary.
Well, I mean, you can see what happened in East Palestine.
Right, that's exactly what keeps my.
So there's gonna be massive legal things, the feds are involved, EPA is involved. There's private actions that are being taken. But yeah, what happens in East Palestine, so when there's an incident, all of those other things happen.
So there's nothing we can do
Or like, what could we do to be less reactionary?
Yeah.
More active?
is there?
Can you, I mean, this is just my curiosity, I know there was a business in the Port of Providence, I don't know if they were in violation of something like this here in Providence, or there was in other parts, I'm not sure.
Which one?
It was the chemical one, yeah, it was that one. I know what you're talking about.
One of the tenants of the Prop
It
Port,
was Prop Port tenant.
while like we were negotiating the lease,
Wasn't it like tiered?
there was like a news article that
Yeah.
came out
There've been a number of news articles about stuff.
about
So,
EPA, like, finding,
So-
I was like,
so some of them get fined, yeah, periodically they get fined.
Uniform.
Yeah, they got fined. So they were found in violation and they were fined by EPA.
So how does EPA find out? They're like, how do
They
they,
do audits.
does that mean like doing on-site
Yeah.
inspections?
Mhm. Yeah, so they'll do inspections and audits, just like kind of anybody does an audit, and they'll be like, okay. So either, like you said, XYZ near tier 2, they go on site and they're like, well, you have way more than that. Which is, I think, what happened with the Univar case. If I remember right, is they did not, like what they had submitted did not match what they had on site.
Yeah. I think that's- And it was
so-
not just here, it was like other.
They had
sites
other
too,
sites
like
too.
$1 million fine.
Yeah.
Here and elsewhere.
So EPA comes down and it's like, here's what you submitted, that doesn't match what I'm seeing in site.
Yeah.
there's no way we can like, if it's not like a municipal law, there's no way like. for us to have more? Is that even something that would be in your purview, like?
We don't have the jurisdiction or the authority. FEMA has no enforcement authority for anything.
Can you not change that?
I mean, technically, legally, anything is possible, depending on ordinances, but, no, FEMA has no, like, I have no enforcement.
Like, I feel like specifically with the top one, we just need to have like more jurisdiction on like. At least like having the ability to find out like what's being stored there, like not rely on one. Federal investigator to do an audit.
Yeah, this is not.
Yeah,
It's now.
It's
That's that was like my first thing, like when I saw that, I was like, wow, in order for like EPA to find them, like, you really gotta like. Be doing something wrong, just because like federal agencies are so slow to act or understaffed, like.
I think they used to have 4 or 5 inspectors, and last time I checked, they're down to 1. I mean, you might know from your PNC background, but I think they used to have like 4 or 5 times as many people there. And then the other people that have jurisdiction down there is the US Coast Guard. So if it's anything on the water, but it's navigable waterways.
Okay.
So depending on where in the port and how far into the water, the US Coast Guard is one of our main partners for anything happening in the port, just because they do have, it's navigable water. So if we get into the whole crane situation, that's not navigable water, Coast Guard won't touch it. DEM won't touch it because it's not leaking any fluids, so we should just not bring up the crane situation. So DEM is one of our big partners, so they obviously get the tier 2 reports. If there's any sort of an incident, they have hazardous material response specialists. So when we have the gasoline tanker overturned, DEM was a major partner in responding to that with the fire department. So they have 24/7 emergency response capabilities. And we work closely with them on that and LAPC2 and the state CERT. And then the state Department of Transportation and the US DOT, depending on if it's rail or if it's interstate, they're the ones that regulate hazardous materials and transport for rail and for Interstate 95. So, which is why DOT was involved in the East Palestine thing, because rail was involved. So it's kind of a hodgepodge mishmash of truly federal authorities that have a jurisdiction.
And for the for the Department of Environmental Management, they have enforcement capabilities in other areas. Do they have enforcement capabilities in the port?
You'd have to talk to Jim Ball and like the EM about more specifics of exactly what they have jurisdiction over. I know there's a lot of nuance there of what they have enforcement or authority to enforce in that regard. So we'd have to check with them on exactly what they have jurisdiction.
And who is he in this, did you say?
So the person we work with most directly is Jim Ball. He's the head of their emergency response and hazardous material response division. But in terms of jurisdiction for like authority to fine and inspect, that might be a different division.
Okay, oh, scary.
Yeah.
Here, I can just,
Okay.
I would say like, that'd be good if we could get them to a meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like, well, just better understand their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Like, this is like a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah,
Like, it's kind of scary. I'm like,
and I don't know if other counselors are probably, he was well director, but after the East Palestine event, I got a lot of folks reaching out to me to be like, this could happen here, what are we doing? And so, you know,
Well, and there's a lot of stuff that comes down to, we have a lot of stuff that comes through by rail. We have a lot of stuff that comes up 195 and 95 corridor.
yeah,
And local jurisdiction is often very limited in terms of interstate transportation, which is why state DOT, like US DOT and US EPA are major players in that, because there's often limited jurisdiction on the local level.
So, I mean, just a hypothetical scenario, since we're talking about it, say a tragedy, disaster, like we saw in Ohio happen here, what would be FEMA's first step or role, and
So we would have a major role. And that's one of the things where Pima and our public safety team in the city would have a significant role on the response side. So one of the reasons that we do so much pre-planning, and the Providence Fire Department is awesome. They're really proactive about their hazardous material team and about trying to go down and do site visits. The lieutenant in charge of the hazmat team, he's really trying to get the team out to do the site visits. So ideally, what would happen is Providence Fire for any hazardous material is going to be the first response. Also, we would bring in hazmat teams and decon teams from across the state. So essentially what happened with the Allen's Ave was we had, I think it was over 400 firefighters at one point brought in for that scene. So it would be a massive response.
Yeah.
And it would be first priority for the fire department is life safety and incident stabilization. So it would be, if it's a leaking tank, plug the hole, put out the fire, deal with the hazmat. That's the fire department's role. Police's role with that is assisting with evacuation, cutting off access, making sure people are not going into that area.
Yeah.
Evacuation would be determined in conjunction between the fire department and Pima. We would do, there's a whole suite of different technological tools called the Aloha Cameo Suite. You can model plumes, depending on the chemical, there's a lot of technical details, but you can figure out where it's going. So one of the issues, there was a whole lot of emergency management problems of what happened in East Palestine. One of the worst is that they had such terrible public messaging about whether an evacuation was necessary, who was to evacuate where. So there was a lot of terrible PIL work that happened in East Palestine, and you had multiple people, multiple officials giving contradictory information to the public and the media, which would not happen in the city of Providence. So what we would do, Pima's role was we would activate the EOC. So we would pull all of our relevant partners in there. We would establish what's called a Joint Information Center, a JIC. So there would be a unified message going out from the city. We would establish a credible, trusted news source.
Yeah.
So there'd be a very key message, and it would be a unified message. So we wouldn't have the mayor saying one thing, the fire chief saying another, and the state saying another, which is what happened in Ohio. So you have multiple figures of authority giving contradictory information.
Yeah.
Our primary role would end up, well, we would have a lot of different roles. One would be evacuation and sheltering. So the folks that need to be evacuated, where are they going? So we would be activating a shelter with Red Cross. Depending on the plume and what areas evacuated would determine what shelter we activate. We have a number of locations identified throughout the city. So there would be an entire shelter operation that's something on. We would be running the EOC operation. We would be helping run the Joint Information Center. We'd be coordinating with the state and federal agencies that would be coming in, because everyone would be coming in. You saw what happened in East Palestine. It just everyone descends. And they need to have very clear command, coordination, and communication in order to have an effective response, which did not happen in East Palestine. So we have a number of different plans that we come into place as well, everything from our Joint Information Coordination Guide to the port evacuation plan. The Providence Fire Department maintains hazardous material response plans. So they'd be operating off of plans. We would have pre-scripted plans that would be operating off of the city administration, city council. You would be communicating out from, ideally, the Joint Information Center is going to be sending out key messaging, so we're all sharing the same message.
Yeah.
And that clear communication makes or breaks an incident, and you've got about 3 minutes to start getting it right, or it can go wrong, because with social media now, it's so fast, and then everything, and once you've lost control of that message, you've lost the public trust.
Yeah.
So, and you can see it actually play out in major incident response all across the country. When you have a good message response, a good PIO, it can really make or break public confidence in the response as well. Because with East Palestine, they couldn't control the message. They had contradictory authorities giving information, which means that nobody trusts anything coming from that, because we've been told wrong things before. Now, who do we trust to get the right message?
Yeah.
So that would be one of our big pieces is EOC operations, shelter operations, evacuation operation, communication and coordination will be essential.
Yeah. How do you immediately, like, And for all the people who live so immediately adjacent to the port, like, how do we immediately communicate with those folks? And do they know kind of like what would happen in the event of emergency?
So that's one, so we have the port sirens, so we would use the port siren. And if you are down the port on Thursday at noon, you'll hear the tone, the siren tone, and then there's an audible message. It'll say, this is a test of the emergency management public warning system,
Okay, so
this is
it's
only a test,
Police.
and then it will sound the siren again. That voice piece we can change.
Okay.
So we can say shelter in place, evacuate, whatever that message needs to be. One of the things that I put in my budget again this year was an upgrade to that system so that we would have the ability to be bilingual.
Mhm.
Right now, our current siren system can only do English. It's 15 years old.
Yeah,
15 years ago, they were not. The technology wasn't there and also they weren't thinking about it.
yeah.
So if we can upgrade that, because we know there's a heavy Spanish speaking population there. The other thing is Code Red. So I mentioned we have the Code Red groups. Code Red has two sides. So you can have pre-scripted groups. So I have a group that is the port facilities, some of the stakeholders in the area.
Yeah.
We also can do a public message that would go out to a geofenced area. So based on the Aloha Cameo, Mark plot plume, we would designate the evacuation zone with whatever half mile, quarter mile surrounding area. And I can geofence that. I can actually do it from my phone. And I can send an emergency alert to cell phone, text message, and if you enter an email, if you sign up and enter an email, go to your email, we can send that in English and Spanish.
Oh, great.
So I can send in a quick alert very quickly. It'll take a few minutes for me to get the English and Spanish message scripted, and then you can also do an audio piece with that as well.
Mhm.
And that would say, evacuate, this is the shelter location, whatever we need that to say,
Yeah.
I can send that out. And that's a very rapid response. So part of the public information messaging and outreach campaign we want to be doing, we're designing this summer, is trying to push more information into that neighborhood of what does evacuate mean? What does shelter in place mean?
Mhm.
The other thing that would be really helpful from a city council side is have you ever heard of Reisner, the Rhode Island Special Needs Registry?
No, I haven't.
So Reisner is the Rhode Island Special Needs Registry. There's a whole lot of information about it on the Department of Health website. And it is an opt-in. So if you have somebody in your family or in the community who is accessing functional needs, if they're electric dependent, so if they use oxygen at home, if they use a wheelchair, they can go in and sign up in the system, and you can put an emergency contact, put all of your information in, and you can put your location. And the way this is, there's two reasons we would need to use this. Also, it's very restricted who has access to this, because obviously it's personal information.
Yeah.
So the Department of Health, myself and my team have access to it during an emergency, but we can't just like go in and be like, oh, I wonder where Mrs. Smith is these days.
Okay.
You have to have a designated reason to go in. But it's critical because, for example, if we're doing an evacuation in the port area, I can go in, I can look at my evacuation area, and I can select from Riser for people who have entered their information, who in there is electrically dependent. Do they have mobility issues?
Mhm.
So if they enter, I use a wheelchair and I don't have a car, we know they're gonna have trouble evacuating.
Yeah.
So I can from that pull a list, but it's only as good as people entering information.
Yeah.
But I can pull a list of everyone who's in the evacuation zone who would be mobility restricted or might need access and functional needs support. And from that, we could send out, whether it's an ambulance, whether it's police cruisers, to help people evacuate who might need that extra support. The only mechanism I have for knowing where those people are is Rising.
No,
That's the only tool we have at our disposal.
who helps people sign up for Reisner? Is it when doctors encourage it? Is that something we should be doing with our residents or like?
So it's definitely some, so we have it at every outreach event. We push it very heavily at our outreach events. People's doctors should be doing it, but they don't necessarily. It would depend on the doctor. A lot of it is genuinely just public outreach and awareness. So if you all push it out to your constituents, I'm always happy to go on and talk about it. The Department of Health has people who work in that office. they're always happy to go give presentations. They give presentations at like nursing homes, at
Yeah.
churches. So it's literally just kind of word of mouth. When I work on an ambulance, I actually carried pamphlets with me. So if I went to somebody and I was like, oh, you're in a wheelchair, you're on oxygen,
Yeah,
here's the flyer. They have multiple language flyers as well that you can hand out. It's all free. And I would be like, here to the caregiver or whatever, like, you should really sign up for this. People are always hesitant to put their personal information on a government site,
yeah,
but I try to emphasize how important that is. So the two primary reasons we would use it is if we need to do an evacuation, whether it's for flooding or for hazardous material, any kind of evacuation, it allows me to identify the people who have mobility issues in that area. The other reason that is super important is if we have a long-term power outage, I can pull the people who are on electric dependent devices.
Mhm.
So if you're on home oxygen, I need to be able to know before it's a crisis, because what usually will happen is people have batteries on their oxygen concentrators, and then when the batteries run out, they call 911 for an ambulance. So now it's become an ambulance out of service, and now you're at the hospital.
yeah,
Whereas all you needed was oxygen.
yeah,
So if we can know ahead of time, we can call and check in, hey, do you need help getting to a shelter? Do you have a backup generator? Do you need help to try and prevent tying up one of our 7 rescues, tying up a hospital bed for somebody who's not actually sick? All they need is their oxygen and they don't have power at home.
yeah.
So so those are the two big scenarios that we really need people.
Do you need an ID? I'm sorry, do you need an ID or anything, or that's right?
For Code Red and for Reisner, there's absolutely no, I didn't know.
I have a couple questions. The first one for Code Red, you have to sign up for that one as well, or you just get those numbers from like the.
So signing up is best. Signing up is by far the best. There's some ability to override that if people have their alerts on their phone. A lot of people turn off emergency notifications on their phone, which I cannot tell you how much that upsets me, because it also means that you cut off the National Weather Service alerts.
Oh,
So
everything off.
Everyone should keep their emergency alerts on their phones. They're there for a reason. One thing that we can do that's beyond, so that overrides that, is something that's called the Wireless Emergency Alert System. It's called a WIA. That is only activated by the state. So if I want to send a WIA message, it's not as precise as well. So it'll hit people farther away. It doesn't have as small a jurisdiction. So Code Red is more precise. And WIA, I have to go through the state. I have to submit the message. It's much slower. I've only sent one, took about 6 hours to go through the process.
Oh, wow.
And that was relatively fast. So if for actual emergency evacuations, Code Red is by far the best tool we have.
Do you think you can get us some of the Reisner pamphlets?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean.
English, Spanish, Portuguese.
English, Spanish.
English, Spanish, yeah.
And then, yeah, it's something that we definitely talk to our colleagues about, so we can do maybe some messaging campaign.
Yeah,
Or something like we all do it at our community meetings at the very least.
yeah, I think it's out, send it all.
And I can get you Code Red as well.
I think that'd be great.
If someone puts their information in the right, and how do you spell Reisner? I'm sorry.
RISNER. It's the Rhode Island Special Needs Emergency Registry.
When someone puts their information in and like they relocate or they have a new number,
Mhm.
they have to then be cognizant to go back and update it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no way that I can go in and update anyone's information. It's blind to me until I need to pull it. The same, and Code Red is actually completely blind for me. So I'll get contacted sometimes because somebody signed up for Code Red. They're like, I wanna unsubscribe. I'm like, you have to do that. I can't even see that you're registered. The only thing that I see is I can see how many people we have total signed up in the system. And then when I geofence an area, so I have to draw a polygon or whatever, I can see how many phones, how many emails, and how many text messages I have for that area. I have no ability to see their specific location. I can't see a name. I can't see anything. So I can only see, okay, in this vicinity, I have 500
Yeah.
people. That's it. So it's very secure in terms of people's personal information. The other thing I say to that is you can sign up with multiple locations. So if you live in the city, or I push it statewide, like if you're not in the city, but if you work in the city, or if your kid goes to school in the city, you can put those points down. So if you have a kid or a family member or where you work, you should put that location in as a location that you want to be alerted to, because you may not even be in the city when something bad happens.
Yeah.
But if your kid's in school and something's happening in the area that's going to be at the school, you'd want to know about that.
So you're saying, when someone's signing up for advisor and they in need of oxygen, you can actually find who that person is?
Yeah, so the way Rising is different, I have a lot more visibility. in Rising. So Code Red is totally blind.
Got it.
Rhode Island Special Needs Registry, I can see a lot more information, including emergency contact information, age, what kind of devices they need. But I have to have a reason to pull it. I can't just go in and put words. But I can also sort by different things. So I can sort, it has the ability, I can sort by oxygen dependent. I can sort by other electrical device. So if somebody's on CPAP, for example, that would count as other electrical device. We can search by LVAD. I don't know if left ventricular assist device is a really critical cardiac thing. That's an electrically dependent device, it's battery dependent. So if somebody has an LVAD, that would be a really high priority. But depending on the type of incident, for an evacuation, I don't necessarily need to know if somebody's on oxygen or not. That's not relevant.
Yeah.
What I need to know is, do they have mobility impairments?
Right.
Yeah.
So depending on the type of incident, you would search and I would pull for different things.
Do we have any evacuation sites outside of the city? Like imagine there's some like crazy plume or something and the wind is crazy, like that could affect.
Multiple
way past
locations.
work. Yeah.
So. Yes and no. So the city does not. Each municipality has established shelter sites. So in the event that, I mean, we also have shelter sites across the whole city.
Yeah.
So it would be unusual to have an event that the entire city would not be able to hold an evacuation location. But hypothetically, in a worst case scenario, or also, if we're evacuating the entire city, we have so many other
Yeah,
problems.
there's so many issues.
Um,
That's a good point.
But the state has other regional shelters. So there's shelter in South County, there's shelters in Cumberland, so we would push people out. One of the other things we always emphasize in our personal preparedness and community preparedness is make a plan, have a kit, be prepared, be informed. So part of make a plan is have an evacuation plan for your family. A lot of people, you don't want to necessarily go to a shelter. They're not particularly comfortable. We provide the necessities, but it's a cot. You've ever slept on a cot, and it's not like a fancy LO bean fold out,
Yeah.
like it's an army cot. And it's not your nice pillow that you have at home.
Yeah.
So part of the make a plan is, do you identify family members, friends who are outside the area that would be a little bit more comfortable location? So the vast majority of people, when they evacuate, they go to family and friends because it's a lot more comfortable. So we always anticipate that we're gonna have more people than we ever actually do. Because most people are going to use family, friends. If they have the resources, they'll go to a hotel. And then we'll end up with folks who don't have any other resources.
Yeah,
Yeah, go for it.
something very concerning you mentioned was the siren language. Do you have a cost estimate on what that might look like and getting Spanish?
It's in my budget, 90,000,
Nice.
about 90,000.
But it wasn't,
It's in the capital improvement.
Oh, is it
Uh,
budget?
Yeah,
Okay, we can go on that.
yeah, it's in that because it's a big
yeah,
capital improvement thing. So that's where it's in the budget. Yeah. I've requested it for 5 years now.
Oh, my gosh.
wait, so you said something about 30 hours, are you still on a 30-hour schedule or
35.
35? You were on a 30-hour?
When the city was during COVID and partial furlough,
They're supposed to be at 30, but.
some people were 20, some people 25, some people were 30.
It's like 35 as in like work hours a week,
Yeah, I get paid for 35 hours.
but you're not really working 35, you're working way more.
I've been here 5 years, I've never once worked
No.
45
I
hours.
say, the director said earlier to us, during COVID. She was working like close to 100 hours and paid 30 hours remaining the whole time.
Yeah. He's like, yeah, that was the exact case we made, just like,
What, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's proper to have that conversation, that's not. Yeah.
we use the word bullshit, yeah.
Yes, that is honest.
Yeah.
So
On average, I probably do 45 to 50 now.
And then how many staff do you have?
5 of us total. I'm the director. David is my deputy director. You got to meet him yesterday. Alexa and Meredith are our preparedness coordinators, and we have an admin assistant. So 4 emergency management personnel and an admin.
And then when.
And that's when we're fully staffed. We've been fully staffed for 6 months now. The longest we've been fully staffed since I've been director.
When Chief Silva presented his budget, he had like a comparison of like his staff to other comparable cities. Do you have that same kind of comparison? Like, where are we compared to like a comparably sized city on the water?
We're lower than a lot. We're better than anyone else in Rhode Island, by a long shot. We're very fortunate that actually of the 39 cities and towns, only 4 have full-time designated single-hatted emergency managers. The rest are part-time or they're dual hat, where the fire chief is also the emergency management director. So we have by far the largest staff. We also have most of the problems in the state. Pawtucket Central Falls, yeah, no capital. So Pawtucket Central Falls still has a emergency manager. Smithfield has a dedicated emergency manager. We have 4. So compared to a lot of, well, it really varies across the country too, because there are some jurisdictions that are just woefully understaffed. So they might have something, a population the size of Providence and have 1 or 2, and they're just horrifically understaffed.
Yeah.
Staffing and budgeting are major topics that always come up in emergency management discussions because there's so much that we do and there's so much more we need to be doing, especially when we start looking at climate change impacts in the coming years. I mean, climate change is here now, like we need to stop talking about 2050. It's here now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more we need to be doing. So one of the exciting things is we went in on a regional catastrophic preparedness grant, which is a big FEMA grant program with Boston last year, and we were successful. So jointly, Boston and Providence won a big grant, and that's going to go through 2025.
Oh.
With that, we'll be able to get 1 additional planning position for the term that's grant funded. So we're in the final processes of, I'm hoping to get that job posted in like the next week or 2, but that's only funded through the grant until 2025.
And
So-
who's gonna take a position that is, we're at 2023,
Yeah.
2 years,
Mhm.
it's like not a real
I mean,
commitment.
that's a good like. Step though to like. Come back to us on finance and city people, you know,
Yeah,
look, this work this person's done, like,
Yeah.
it shows like, we
Yeah.
need full time.
yeah,
The office used to have 3 or 4 more people.
When did it go down?
So there used to be something called the UASI, which is an Urban Area Security Initiative. In the post 9/11 era, the new Department of Homeland Security went through and ranked all of the cities in the country based on this crazy threat and hazard index. And they said the top 100 on this list get boatloads of money. Providence was on the top 100. We're about, depending on the year, somewhere between 52 and 56 on the list. Over the years, as we've gotten farther and farther from 9/11 and budgets keep shortening the list. So in about, I don't remember if it was 2012 or 20, no, it was 2014, 2015, we got bumped off the UASI list. So we lost a ton of money. So the whole addition that I was talking about at FEMA, that was federal money, that was UASI money, and we lost that. So places like Boston, Denver, Miami, big cities, the top, I think now it's like 48 or 50, the top 48 or 50, still get UASC money, so they get extra positions, they get extra funding, they get extra resources.
Yeah,
We're just below that risk. We're on the list, we're in the middle of the pack
Yeah.
kind of, but we dropped off the federal list. So depending on what happens at federal levels.
yeah.
Is there anything like we can do as like city councilors to like write letters of like advocacy or support to agencies like EPA, like, hey, like this is very concerning that we only have one regionals. You think that?
I mean, yeah, so, and also at the state level, so as city council, you have a big voice, especially in Providence, so. Advocating on a state level and advocating on the, up to the federal level, saying like these are high priorities, those always help. And then in terms of grant stuff, letters of support always go a long way. So one of the things that I do a lot is I wrote a letter of support to South Providence heads for a grant that they ended up getting. I've written letters of support for the one Oscopeck River Watershed, Alicia over there and her team. So for some grants that they've put in for.
Yeah,
So when you're putting in for these grants, like that's one of the reasons that Boston and Providence won, is because we were collaborative and we had projects that were both Boston and Providence. Because they want to look that you're not just off doing your own thing, that you actually have, because anyone can say they have stakeholder buy-in.
yeah,
But actually having that grassroots
signature,
engagement and a letter being, this is all the stuff we're already working on. We have a demonstrated history of collaboration. So a lot of what we do, and that's one of the great strengths of engagement and partnership with city council, is you all are trusted voices in your communities. So when you're doing outreach events, if you're doing community meetings, like we are always happy to, barring whatever scheduling I can do, we're always happy to come present. So whether it's about hurricane preparedness, if it's winter storm preparedness, if it's extreme heat, if it's cyber hygiene. If it's, how do you build a kit? What does that mean when you're low income and
yeah,
don't have the resources? How do you have that personal preparedness? Whatever resources we can get out for you, your voice is so much stronger than mine. Most people don't know I exist in the city, but everyone knows you all exist. So if I can get you the information and the resources, or just knowledge that like Wisner is a thing that's out there and why we would need it and why it's important. That's a huge piece of it as well.
One thing I've been thinking about as a counselor is like, how do I, from a resident's perspective, what are the things that would be helpful resources? DPW things like, here's how you donate a mattress.
yeah,
Here's how you sign up for this, you know, like, and then just, bam, send it out in a mailer to folks, like in one-stop shop of like resources.
yeah,
Because it feels like everything's so fragmented as I go from and maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm not. I'm not,
I don't know how to navigate.
yeah, it's just,
Confusing, yeah.
it's so confusing, like, how can we just provide a one-stop shop of like really useful things to residents? Like, where they're not clicking on the links, trying to, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Bill's smiling, I just want, everything's like so like up in the air, like I'm trying to bring it to ground level for people, and it's like to think about, wrap my mind around it, it's like so much work in my mind, because I struggle to find the resources so quickly and immediate for folks, so. Sorry, I'm just like going on a tangent, but that is part of getting resources, is like bringing it in like maybe it's not a packet, but just a one website, you know, of like streamlining it really, you know?
So, 2 points on that. One is we have a lot of stuff on the FEMA website. So we have, right now, I just updated our cooling centers page, and we have extreme heat tips. So we have a lot on our website. We are always kind of, I mean, but again, like, we're responsible for updating and managing that. So, yeah, that's what I was doing before I came here, is updating the library hours. So we have that, and then I also literally just got an email, it's probably last week, a request from one of the mayoral fellows, his name is Enzo. So a mayoral fellow who was putting out to all the department directors, asking for a very brief synopsis of what your department is, what do you do, what do constituents, like what constituents go to you for? So they might already have something like that in the works. So I just submitted my write-up for Pima last week. I think then fellows names, and so maybe I can check my emails because I just sent the email last week. But no, I agree.
Yeah, no, and just like the issue from like that, I always run into, and I think you do on resonate is like, as like counselors, I mean, we all have a day job. So, I mean, we know what to do, but like, fair counselors, like, we hear therapists or fire department, and you have like the expertise stuff is just so like. I'm not gonna say like disconnected from like our realm, but it's just like something that, I mean, how often in our lives do we talk about emergency management? Trying to get that all in a digestible pamphlet, I don't know what schools, that's what I would like to see is like pamphlet of the city. Resources that are available to like everybody, to trash, to emergency readiness, to. You know, school resources. Well, we should definitely.
Yeah, how do we, the other thing is like, if we gave them all the information. How do we get folks to kind of like pause and take in the information? Like, how do we incentivize people? Not because people care about this, but the truth of the matter is like, I think you mentioned like. He's getting frustrated when folks kind of like block out the emergency notification on the phone, because they think our emergency is never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like the probability of that in their mind is like not likely, right? But like, how do we get folks to prioritize emergency management, other resources to get incentivized them in some way? And that often comes with like administrative overhead, cost to like, you know, like I joke around, like I work as a school social worker, but when I try to get parents to come to things so that it can benefit their family and their children, I often have to like feed them and like, you know, like provide dinner and get them. And so like, I'm not saying in order for folks to care about emergency management, we have to feed them, but.
No, but we do actually.
Yeah.
When we do the hazard mitigation plan,
Yeah.
outreach and engagement events, like. I have to figure out a way to provide some kind of food, because if I'm like dinner provided,
People show up.
people show
Yeah,
up.
yeah, that's been my experience, I don't know, like cast.
No, it's entirely.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask I'm sorry, Chair, can I ask not to. There was I got an email about CPR training. I think that was being facilitated by FEMA.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing.
So we do hands-on CPR. So if you need like a healthcare provider or BLS license, which some places like for work require, we don't have the capability, we don't have the licensure to do that, but we can do hands-on CPR classes. We teach a class called Until Help Arrives and Stop the Bleed. So Stop the Bleed is tourniquets, basic pressure, if somebody's bleeding, how do you stop that?
Yeah.
That's a FEMA program, and then Until Help Arrives is also a FEMA program. So Until Help Arrives is about 4 hours. Stop the Bleed is only like an hour.
Oh.
But Until Help Arrives has 5 sections. It's everything from how do you determine if a scene is safe? The entire premise of Until Help Arrives is that the people who are there when something bad happens are the true first responders, because you're there and you witness it.
Yeah.
So whether it's a car accident, whether it's a train derailment, whether it's an active threat incident, the people who are there are the first responders before fire and police arrive. So what can you do in that situation to help people? And it gives you the tools to, is the scene safe or should you be running? How do you call 911 effectively? Because a lot of people are never actually taught how do you call 911. And that, like, how do you call them? How do you accurately convey information? The etiquette on a 911 call, which a lot of people have never thought about. I don't know if you've ever had to call 911.
Very, not often,
But a lot of people, when you're in those situations, it's very stressful.
Yeah.
And then how do you think through like what information do you need? So if you see a car accident on the highway, do you know where you are?
Yeah.
Are you northbound? Are you southbound? What mile marker are you at? What exit are you by? Because that's the information they need to know to get you help. So there's a whole section on how to call 911, how to determine if scene is safe. We teach Stop the Bleed as part of Until Help Arrives. Comforting somebody. So in those bad situations, if all you can do is just be there with somebody, what are some things to know? And then we have a small section on disaster psychology as well. So kind of the trauma of even witnessing an event or being engaged in that event. And at the end of it, we make sure that everyone leaves with a tourniquet because we feel silly. We don't think it's right that we teach people how to use a tourniquet and we don't give it to them. And a good tourniquet's about $35.
Oh.
So we don't want people buying a $10 one off Amazon. So part of the thing that's in my budget every year is money for tourniquets so that when people graduate the Until Help Arrives certificate class, they leave with an actual tourniquet. And then we also teach community emergency response team. So that's that's 2 nights a week for a month. So the 24-hour class.
When's the next time that's happening?
CERT is probably gonna be September.
I really wanted to do it last year, but can't think of it.
Yeah.
No worries. So we'll try and push out. It depends if we get enough sign up. If we only get 2 or 3 people, we can't really like run it. But we did about 15 people graduated in May.
That's great.
When I got the email, I was like, wow, because I'm always trying to, when I have monthly neighbor meetings, I'm trying to, how do I equip my neighbors with real substantive information that can translate to skills, like having I'm always talking about like a bottom-up approach and like how leadership and empowering folks. And I was like, it would be amazing. Now, it might not be possible because I'm realizing how overworked and understaffed you all are. But I would love if there could be a possibility where I could, in a monthly neighborhood meeting, or we could do 2 meetings per month, one neighborhood meeting that's centric to like neighborhood issues, and another meeting where I could have PEMA teach a skill, an emergency management skill. And because I the North End, they really care about the monthly neighborhood meetings. So I'm super appreciative of that. So like if there's a possibility where I could, and where it doesn't add to the never-ending workload for you all, but like I would love to invite PMI and teach at a neighborhood meeting a skill that could be very useful to neighbors. That like CPR, that was like my dream and vision until like now, where I'm like, oh my God, that's a possibility, but I would love it.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do it every month, but
Not every month.
and I've done like hurricane presentations for, I think the last one's like the Jewelry District Association or something like that. So if you're having community meetings and if it's topical, we're always happy to go out and do presentations. We have mannequins. So you saw one of our mannequins last night. We have mannequins and test AEDs as well. So we can also, depending on how much time, if you want to do something as part of your meeting, we can do stuff that's as little as like 10 to 15 minutes. So I can do on that riser in like 10 to 15 minutes. So we have small pieces of things that we can do. Like 10 minutes on code red and emergency alerts in the city. So if you want to build a piece into your full meeting, we'll do that a lot of times. And then if you want to have a separate training, specifically, we usually just ask for like signups. And then we can do, Until Help Arrives, we usually do it at PEMA and we ask people to come there because it is a half day to do Until Help Arrives. We tried to shorten it and we can't really go much less than about 3 hours, 3.5 hours on that. And that doesn't leave time for much practice because we actually want people to practice tourniquets and things like that. And
Would you be able to break it up in weeks?
yeah.
So like,
Yeah, so we can break stuff up in weeks. We can teach tourniquets, like if all you want to stop the bleed, we can do that in like half an hour to 45 minutes. I can teach you how to use a tourniquet in 10 minutes. So some of those smaller pieces, we can break out into smaller sections as well. Stop the bleed, if you do a thorough one, is about an hour.
So the stopically and until the help arrives. How often do you do those, or do you kind of just?
We try to do a help arrives about 3 times a year, but also if we have locations that request it, we can go do special classes. So we had PPL, Providence Public Library, requested an active threat training, so we can also package active threat training. That was about 2.5 hours. That was an hour of going through the slides and the training of active threat, and then we did about an hour and 20 minutes. That was cycling through stations. So we had a stop the bleed, we had hands-only CPR, and then we had kind of a walkthrough of a facility of like, this is how you block a door going in, this is how you block a door going out, this is how to like evacuate an area. So we kind of did different rotations for that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Kevin has to pop off. I think he did just pop off.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. Any more questions? I know I have a million, but we should not keep for your own.
No, it's fine. I've got no other plans tonight.
I mean, it's
I mean,
super glad we're having this conversation and.
For one final question I have, already have 2 final questions. One is for the cooling centers in the summer, just knowing how many like high heat days we have and how many more, it's, it's just growing every year. Like, are there specific? Like, are there only specific places people can go, or are there any like new partnerships we can do? I mean, you already went to the library. It's something where people don't have to just go sit in a cool spot, but can like be at a library or be at a place they want to meet anyway, like,
so
I guess.
the library,
What do we do? Yeah. So
what do we do? What do we do about that?
Yeah, what do we recommend you?
Easy question.
Let's just figure that out while we're here.
So we have the partnership with the libraries, so when they're open, you can go there.
Yeah.
The hours are sometimes the problem, so if they're not open, we can't force them to be open.
Yeah.
Honestly, some of the best places are like the mall. Malls are great for that, if they're not often viewed as such, and we don't have an official partnership with them.
Yeah.
But like malls are a
huge,
great
they
place to
have
go, they have
space.
tons of AC. They've got tons of space, you don't necessarily have to buy something. So malls are great for that. We don't advertise them as such because they're not a designated cooling center.
Yeah.
But we want people to kind of start thinking about locations like that.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that, that's the mall,
Yeah.
our libraries, where you can like go do something.
Yeah.
One of the issues we've had in prior years is if we have an extreme heat date, that none of the libraries are open, none of our designated cooling centers are open, we have to open a place, but there's nothing to do, so we open schools. That's kind of-
hang out.
and they just sit, but like, what are they supposed to do? So we don't actually typically have a lot of great attendance.
Yeah.
Understandably so,
Yeah.
because what are you gonna do, sit in the cafeteria and be cool?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're working towards, and too bad Kevin just dropped off, is with the rec centers, because if we can get AC in the rec centers, then the rec centers can be cooling centers.
Also, I would just love the rec centers have the AC, like.
They need the
It's
AC.
like, they speak programs in the summer and then it's 1,000 degrees in there, like.
And that's like honestly a real heat injury concern for me, is like the kids in the rec centers.
Playing basketball,
With
it's
extreme-
90 degrees out, like.
That's actually heat injury level. So I always worry about that, but like if we can get ACs in the rec centers, they can be cooling and warming centers and the seat owns them. So we can open them when they need to. If I can have rec staff come in, we would have to figure out like the budgeting for overtime and things like that. But we would have a lot more utility of them. Also, your kids can come, they play games, they have crafts there. they have
Yeah.
All of this stuff. So, and they're well situated throughout the community. So one of my major dreams was to make sure every rec center has AC.
Yeah.
Because then and that also ties in with the resilience hub work that we want to be working on. So if we have ACs, they can be heating and cooling centers with activities. If we can get backup power at all of them, we can make them resilience hubs.
Yeah.
So.
There's federal money available, like in the IIJA and the IRA, like I'm talking to Vincent Brown about,
Mhm.
I'm talking to that's a human being, but like that rec center. And
Yeah.
everyone there. Because there is money for like HVAC equipment through the IRA, like to get, heat pumps and things like that for municipal buildings, is that like?
So I think,
Do that.
I think sustainability, so sustainability was working on some of that stuff with it.
I think
But
that would direct the one a little bit too.
yeah, and I've talked to her as well, because if we could get that accomplished, like, if we can get ACs in, they can be cooling centers. If we can get backup power, they can be resilience hubs.
And people already trust them, it's not like a weird place they have to go, it's like.
And that has so many, because a lot of the research out there about cooling centers, about resilience hubs is they need to be places that people are already comfortable going, that they are familiar with, that they've been before. Because otherwise, during times of stress,
Yeah,
people are not going to want to go places they've never been before. They don't know how to get there, they don't know what to expect when they get there. But our rec centers are well situated throughout the community. It also ties in with some of the work that we're trying to do for emergency food distribution, commodities point of distribution. Like, this all ties together, because if we have these trusted locations in the communities that people are familiar with, they already access resources there, their kids already use services there,
yeah,
and they are resilience hubs, it improves our ability to build that baseline resilience of the community so much better. And that's kind of blue sky day to day. In black sky days, when something bad happens, people are going to have all of these resources so much closer to them.
yeah, totally. And I guess my last question, we should let you go home and dinner at some point, is for the H&P process that you're undertaking, like what's the timeline for when to be like outreach into community? And also who's on your committee and can we help you in any way?
So yes and yes, please. So I gotta get the scope of work done, gotta get that out, gotta get that awarded to a consultant. I'd like to be doing community outreach and stuff by the fall, if at all
Okay.
possible, because if we could do like September to March, something like that, it does take a while to get all of the pieces together. Last time, I think we did 3 or 4 community meetings. I'd like to do at least that many.
Yeah.
The community input's really important. We have a whole list of people, it's actually on the hazard mitigation plan. It's available on the website. You just Google like 2019 Providence hazard mitigation plan, you can find it on PDF. And have your bedtime reading. But there's a
I
whole
totally
list.
read it years ago. It's
Really?
yeah.
So you know exactly what time it is. So that has a whole list of who was on the hazard mitigation planning committee last time. Typically it's like the director of sustainability, we have some stakeholders from the community. I don't think we had anyone from city council last time, I think nobody really wanted to be on last time. But if there's interest in being on it, like we would welcome that input.
On what exactly?
The hazard mitigation plan process,
Mhm.
which you need like an updated one right together, in the funding. So.
Yeah, so if you don't have a current updated hazard mitigation plan, it can actually impact your ability to get funds from FEMA. So all of the hazard mitigation and growth planning I was talking about, you're not eligible to apply for it if you don't have a FEMA approved plan. And then in the aftermath of a disaster, it can impact your ability to access some types of recovery funding as well. So it's like a must do, like you have to get that. And at some point when it's all processed, I actually have to send it to city council to get city council approval on like stamp on it. You'll see it on like,
Yeah.
so it's a really important plan. And then the other piece of that is that through the hazard mitigation planning process, you can identify key areas of concern or key areas of focus. And in the future, when you're applying for hazard mitigation grant funding through HMGP or through BRIC, through the FEMA programs, if you can tie it back to, hey, this was identified in our last hazard mitigation planning process as a key priority, this project or infrastructure or flood mitigation, or whatever it was, it helps boost kind of your application a little bit, because we went through this whole planning process. These are all our priorities. This is why this project is important. So it's a must do for us.
Yeah, I wonder if like, so you don't have to do, like, if our ward meetings are helpful, if there's ways we can like combine. Some of them, like, 2, 3, 4 or something, I don't know, like I remember the electricity, or Chairman Ramsey and I did like a joint committee meeting, because we were hearing the same questions.
Yeah.
And so just did one together, it's like answer your questions about community electricity, I wonder if like areas like 2, 3, 4, I'm just making these up, like. 5, 6, 7, I don't know, I'm just like. Wanna like. I don't know, so you're not having to go to 15 different communities.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there's also some things, so like last time we did, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Survey 123. So Survey 123 is online, it's hosted by ArcGIS, and it's a mapping system, but it's kind of like community data gathering. So you can go in and we established a link and you can go in. And it's a great way for the community to help us identify areas that are problem areas. So they can drop a pin and be like, this culvert always is the first to flood.
Oh.
And
That's,
yeah, it's
You should have
great.
okay,
And there's a lot of different utility for it. There's a lot of different potentials for how you could use it. But it's essentially crowdsourcing hazard and risk concerns. So if we didn't get a lot of participation in it this time. It was kind of a new technology, and I think that we didn't have great participation from the younger demographic who might be comfortable with that kind of thing. But that's a great way to kind of push that out too.
yeah,
And then we can collate all of the geographic data and be like, okay, so these are like our spots in the city that are a big problem. I mean, we know some of them obviously,
yeah,
but that local knowledge is so critical.
yeah. Oh, that's great. Any final questions? I don't know that we have members of the public on anymore, but we have ever.
No. Zero attendees.
There's probably go watch every too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm definitely gonna share this. When I share those videos, people in Ward 3 do watch them. Cause I get comments. Well, thank you. This has been amazing. Yeah, thank you. I can't think of enough. One, for all the work you do, but two, like, for this conversation. I think it's super valuable.
Absolutely.
And I'll definitely be sharing this.
And if you have other questions that come up, you know how to reach me anytime.
Yeah.
So I'm always happy to provide follow-up or additional information. And thank you for all your interest in this.
No,
Yeah,
really.
no, that was my only other comment, so please like utilize this.
Yeah, reach out.
Yes, yeah, big fans here.
We could spearhead or let our colleagues know.
Yeah.
Some things are coming on the pipeline, or some things that you might
It's
need cheerleaders for.
Yeah, if you need letters, things, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's awesome. And I think one of the biggest strengths that we have right now is we have Director Normandy, our Chief Normandy.
Oh,
That's great. Yeah, no, I keep messing up too. We've got sustainability that's working on this. We have a lot of different interplay with other departments that are trying to work on these projects too.
Yeah.
So if we can like put on some like the rec centers would be so great. It would be such a huge thing if we can get AC in there.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't seem like that big.
I know, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I just looked at the AC system at Big Brown and it's like, what? Okay. There aren't that old buildings, at least Big Brown is not that old.
No, I like heat
You're from
pumps.
around the problems.
You can do heat pumps.
Yeah, you do
Heat
heat
pumps are
pumps.
great.
And then the configuration.
Yeah, so I think we have some really clear areas for great progress. That would make a real difference. And then we can just scare the pants off everybody by having them watch clips.
Yeah, yeah, I'm totally gonna watch this weekend.
You can text me how horrifying it is.
No.
Remember, don't watch it before bedtime.
Okay.
I made that mistake the first time I watched it. And I adjunct at Salve and I assigned it to my students as part of the thing. And I was like, do not watch it before bedtime.
Yeah.
Anything.
Sometimes they'll be like, that was awful. I had nightmares. I'm like, I told you.
Good.
You're warned. I have them watch a documentary about Katrina as well.
Okay.
Trouble the Waters. If you want
Oh.
another good one.
Yeah.
Trouble the Waters, yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
So it's a last, you know.
Yeah, I'll see you. sure.
yeah, watch Shrek afterwards, like Shrek is like my, like. Your reset, yeah, so after that, watch Shrek before bed, or whatever, Ted Lasso, whatever's your thing.
No, I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to like
I
reset.
just don't watch movies.
See, I don't either.
The world's
I've worked
scary.
I've worked in EMS for way too many years. so I don't-
Secondary job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We won't keep you any longer. I don't think we'll keep the first too long, but thank you so very
Thank
much
you.
for all you do. And yeah, you're. fans and also for however we can.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So.
All in favor?
I.
All opposed? Excellent.
The suspense.
Yeah, it's going forever. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, truly. And